So in the displacement defense mechanism, what's actually happening here is you're trying to reduce your anxiety by finding another release for it that won't be on the object that you can't release it on, because that might get you fired in the first place. But you know, you're safe going home and venting to your partner. Your partner is safe to vent on the kid. The kid feels safe to vent on the dog until the dog bites him, because they then deserved it anyway. So that is displacement. Next one to mention here is projection. Projection's kind of easy. It's kind of interesting too. It's one of those situations where there's something that's wrong with you, but you don't see it in yourself. You see it in somebody else. You know, that person is this way, not me. I'm fine. Or the classic example of, I'm not angry, you're angry. Well, you sure sound angry to me, but you're trying to deny your anger, okay? Yeah, and you do it not by just denying it to yourself, which we're going to talk about in a second, but you put it on somebody else. You project that characteristic, that personality type onto somebody else, okay? I don't have an anger management problem, you know, and therefore you're projecting that onto other people. Okay, speaking of denial, it is not a river in Egypt. That's an old joke. Most of you probably heard it. But denial, instead of being a river in Egypt, is just basically a defense mechanism whereby you just kind of flat deny that something just happened. And you know, that could be kind of losing touch with reality if you hang on to that one. This is one that I'll see in counseling a lot. People are in denial about something. You know, I'm not crazy, or I'm not depressed, or especially I'm not an alcoholic. You know, there used to be a t-shirt that says, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm a drunk. Alcoholics go to meetings. Well, okay, make that fine distinction. You can keep right on drinking. So, but the denial especially is a big one with people with drug and alcohol problems. Yeah, I can quit anytime I want. Yeah, sure. Do it right now. I dare you. Well, I don't do it now. I don't want to right now. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So,
I don't feel like it.
I'm sorry. I don't feel like it. Yeah. Now, there are cases where denial can actually be kind of useful. Especially when you suffer some kind of loss. I know that it's happened to me in the past for sure. I'll hear about losing somebody. And a lot of times our very first reaction is denial. It's kind of like, oh no, that can't be true. You know, it's like, whoa, no, that just can't be true. And I think in a case like that, as long as of course it doesn't continue on forever or a length of time, is that it kind of gives you, it works as a shock absorber. It allows you to kind of absorb really bad news and work your way into, oh my God, you know, this is reality. So I bring that up also because there's certain Freudian people who feel like any defense mechanism used is maladaptive. And I don't happen to agree. I think that, you know, it's not a bad idea to keep our anxieties down by doing some of these things, as long as you realize what you're doing. And as long as you realize that you're doing it just to help yourself. You're not trying to alter reality. You're not trying to change facts into something that doesn't exist. But you use it in this case, like in denial, as a shock absorber, as rationalization, because you know what we do in the end have to be able to live with ourselves. If you just spend all of your life rationalizing away stuff, you're probably doing a lot of stuff wrong. But if while doing the rationalization, you go, okay, I'm not proud of myself for having done that, but in this circumstance, you know, I have to rationalize why I did it. I don't want to do it again. That's not nearly as bad, and quite frankly, might be kind of healthy if you need to do it. So I come from a different school there. And then the last one in your book, but I'm going to mention a bonus one here because y'all will have to use it, just like I do. Regression is one in your book that is kind of interesting. How many of you like to go back and listen to oldies music and find it comforting? How many of you like some foods that you liked as a child, and it's a kind of a comfort food kind of thing, you know? I mean, come on, you learned to like ice cream as a kid. How do you still not like it? Does it still not like one of those little experiences you go, ah, it takes you back?
I like it, but it doesn't like me.
Oh, well, then you're gonna have to have a conversation with it then. Are you lactose intolerant?
Yep, it's come with age.
That's a shame. That's a real shame. Um, I think there's something genetic to that too. It seems to be um, so apparently the more Northern European heritage that you have, the more likely you are to be lactose intolerant. Now, having said that, that's not an absolute rule. There's people that are from the equator area, their ancestors are from there, that can be lactose intolerant. And then there's plenty of people from, say, Scandinavia that don't have a problem with it, but they notice some of those trends there. So, but that's, hopefully you can find something else that's comfort food for you. Of course, ice cream is a dangerous comfort food. I've had quite a bit over this last year, and if I moo every now and then, you'll know why. So now, but regression is just that. For the way that regression works is that you kind of find a way to take yourself back to something from when you were a child that was comforting. I guess an extreme example is if something really bad happened to you, you went and crawled into bed, got in a fetal position, and started sucking your thumb. That would be kind of the ultimate regression. But I think a lot of us will find moments that it's just really nice. And let me tell you, old school music is my music. I love it. Not that I don't like some of the new music, but it's just, I have so much good old music. My gosh, I grew up with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and some absolutely great groups. Yeah, I like that music, and yeah, that's a great way to regress for me. Sometimes after a long day, I might just kick back and turn on my old tunes, and it comforts me. And according to the Freudians, this is a defense mechanism. Sure does feel good, though. One quick funny story. I know, well, it might not be funny to y'all, but it was funny at the moment. I walked into the living room, this is a number of years ago now, and my 16-year-old stepdaughter had one of her songs on. It wasn't a bad song. It was one I actually liked, but I stopped and I listened to it with her for just a little bit, didn't say anything. And at the end of the song, I looked at her and said, I feel sorry for you. And she looked at me like, what? Where did that come from? I said, because we used up all the good music. And she just looked at me. She didn't know what to say. It was the only time I ever left her speechless. I walked off. But so anyway, okay. And that was just for fun. Everybody's music. Here's the thing, and this is slightly off subject, but I think it's something that I've observed over the years. Yeah, my music from when I was young is my favorite. Well, so was my parents the same way. Those are the tunes they would hum. And, my children that was the tunes they grew up with. And I think that the reason we're so attached to the ones that we grew up with, especially from our teen years, is we hit puberty, everything's so intense. And so we attach the music to intense feelings because we're such, we're just so intense about all these new things in the world we're discovering because of what puberty does to our brain. And so I really think that we all look back on that music as the best music ever. Nobody's ever going to beat it. And you know what? We're all right. Everybody that has their favorite music. Yeah, great. That's cool. Okay. So now there's one more I want to mention, not in the book, but the reason I'm going to mention this one is it's an important one for both of our professions, okay? And I think in any caregiver profession that you're in, this it's an important one, okay? Numbers in the middle of it. This one's called intellectualization. This is the defense mechanism that kind of, it really refers to cutting off your emotions completely so you can function. That if you're going to be working in situations with emergencies, you're going to be you're coming across animals that are going to be mutilated and they're in really bad shape. And, my natural inclination, why I could never work in your profession. I'm just horrified when I see an animal that's suffering. And because I get too emotional about it, I couldn't work in your profession. And you're going to run into that. Doctors, whether they're working with animals or humans, have to turn on this intellectualization. When you run into an emergency, you've got to be able to click on what you need to do. You got to keep your emotions out of it. You got to come through the checklist of things you got to do in triage. and then what the next steps beyond the triage are. What are the, what do we have to do to control the shock? What do we got to do? Yada, yada. You go through it all. Is it bleeding involved? And so you go through these checklist things. And because you keep yourself up here and not down here, you're able to do your job. Okay. Now, the bad part about it is when you run into situations where you keep doing that, you take that home with you, you treat your family with that kind of thing. And you have to learn how to turn it on and turn it off. It's an important one because you can protect yourself emotionally from what you're going to be seeing. In my profession, some of the things I've known therapists that had to get out of the profession because they couldn't make a shock absorber to all the bad news that we have to hear. I mean, some of the cases of abuse I've worked with, oh man, they are truly something. I mean, it's unbelievable what human beings can do to each other. I'm a history buff. I've read all sorts of tortures and things like that. And people are still people, and there's still people out there that, let's just say, they shouldn't be having babies. And of course, like I've mentioned before, as long as there's child abuse, I'll always have a job. And I've got to be able to do the intellectualization so that at the end of the day, I can walk away from this and have my own life without going and blowing up. You'll need to use this some too. It's just be aware of it and be aware that, there comes a point where you have to turn it off, and that again is why I highly encourage all of you to find something that does for you what birding does for me. You get away from it all. And even, I haven't been birding all my life. There were other things I've done. I was a golfer for a while. And so I could just throw myself into that. And it was something I could enjoy and I could feel happy by doing. And that's what you're going to have to make sure you continue to do. Don't lose a sense of happiness in spite of what you have to do professionally. So that's why I bring this one up, even though it's not in the book. It's one that you'll need. You'll need to be able to do that, but you also need to be able to turn it off. So be aware of it, use it when you have to, but be able to walk away and say, okay, I'm going to go do and be with people that can bring me joy and keep me happy and all that. So, okay. So I think you understand why I brought that one up. All right. So that, in a real small nutshell, is Freud. There's I could fill a whole term full of Freud stuff. And I've taught the theories of personality as a course, and I'll spend a couple of weeks on Freud. So this is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot more to it. And while it's kind of fun, and I do enjoy talking about it, I use very little of it. I mentioned the defense mechanisms. Another thing that Freud felt like as part of his theory is that depression, he defined depression as anger turned inwards. And I do see that sometimes. And I don't want to sound sexist here, but I see it more often in women than I do men. And when I came up with that idea, that observation, was when I was working in the prison with all men. I realized that a whole bunch of the men that go to prison are depressed, but they turn their anger outward on other people and they act out on it. Women are the ones who will turn it in on themselves and turn it into a more recognizable clinical depression, and they're more likely to come for help for it. Way more women are diagnosed with depression than men. I think it's about 3 to 1. Now, on the flip side, I think men tend to self-medicate more, and so they're much more likely to be diagnosed with alcoholism and drug addiction and things like that. So I think it all evens out. I think both sexes get as depressed. I just kind of think, and maybe it's a thing we teach the sexes: men, you act out; women, you be submissive. It's like, no, that it doesn't work for either one of us very well. So that anger turn inwards that Freud came up with, I have seen that. And more than once, I've actually brought that up without saying Freud says. I have said to women that I'm working with who are depressed, I said, it sounds like you've got anger, but you're afraid to let it out, that you turn it in on yourself. And almost every time I've said that, they're going, yeah, that sounds about right. So now this gives me something to work with therapeutically. I don't go into the Freudian analysis, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter, what kind of treatment this is going to involve. Some of that's a lot of fun too, but Yeah, there are parts of it that I'll pick and choose. I'll pick and choose from anything if it'll help somebody. So I don't ignore him completely. But in terms of his whole this thing about all of sex being the main drive, yeah. In fact, there's a term I want to give to you that I don't remember if it was in the book or not, but it's called libido. This is another word you'll hear, and this is the reason I'm bringing it up. This is a word that's in the common usage in the language. It came from Freud. Freud, as I've mentioned, thought that our sexual energy is the force behind everything that we do and feel. And he gave this force, this sexual energy, the term libido. And you'll hear that often when you hear somebody's got a really strong libido, means they have a strong sex drive. This came from Freud. So I just want to give you that term. I don't remember if I put it on the test or not at this point, but it's still a term that's good to know. And that's part of what I want to give you some practical stuff out of this class. That's one of them. So anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about just briefly some of the other things that are not thought to be such a good thing about Freud. One is too pessimistic. That's just not very optimistic to think that you're fully formed by 7 years old, and really the only way that you can do anything about it is to go somebody trained in Freudian psychoanalysis to help you with it, and it takes a long time to go through analysis to try and get better or anything. So it's considered to be very pessimistic, and it really is. And if you go back to chapter 1, when we talked about what makes a good theory, can you test it? Freud is not a very good theory. These things are hard to test. How do you test these defense mechanisms? And maybe you can a little bit. That might be the most testable thing about his theory. How do you test libido? How do you measure that? How can you quantify that? How can you do research? And especially, how do you measure an id or an ego or a superego? So it's not very testable at all. I really think of it not so much as a theory, but a philosophy. Philosophies don't require testing and all. Philosophies often produce areas for study, but which Freud did. I mean, a lot of people have reacted to his theories with other theories that we've been able to test, but his is not very testable. It's pretty much based on all case studies, and it's also very chauvinistic. Freud studied, I mentioned those 30 women, which were the basis for all of his writings, and yet he focused mostly on men. And we talked about the Oedipus complex. He wrote about that in great detail. We talked about the Electra complex and the penis envy. He didn't spend nearly as much time on that. Interestingly, and I think ladies, you will appreciate this, towards the end of his life, he did admit that he didn't really understand women. It's like, you think? So maybe he had a couple of small insights towards the end of his life. Another interesting little factoid about him was he was a lifelong cigar smoker, and he died of throat cancer. But he was an avid cigar smoker, and when you think about it, remember the description of a phallic object, and he's sticking this cigar in his mouth every, like 8 times a day at least. I think I read where he smoked at least 8 cigars a day, and yeah, it's he did, and so he had his rationalization was that, well, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. I was like, okay, there, Sigmund boy, sure, we'll buy that. And then one last thing, and because I have Irish ancestry. I appreciated very much the fact that he once said the Irish cannot be psychoanalyzed. We were just too weird for him. He couldn't figure us out at all. I'm going, yeah, I'll buy that. That's okay. I figured you out instead. So in a nutshell, that's Freud with a little trivia thrown in. And we'll get back to him and his therapies in the next chapter. And I'm sure you'll be going, okay, on that part too. So, any questions on Freud? Yes, Avery, libido means sex drive. It's really taken that way more these days. The Freudian sense is that all of the energy that drives you and motivates you is sexual, but we use the term libido now for sex drive. That's more the common usage. All right, so we're going to move. Freud, in his day, had a very uh, influential set of other psychiatrists that joined him. Each of them started out following Freud and going along with him. A couple of them broke away, though. They came away with the very first variations on a theme, if you will, that there was this Viennese circle that was very famous at the time. And Freud, taught these guys all about his analysis and his theory and all of that. And then a couple of them broke away and made names for themselves. And the first one we're going to mention is a guy named Carl Jung, is how it's pronounced. Even though it's spelled Jung, it is pronounced Jung. Okay. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on him because I think he's weirder than Freud. Freud, I can have fun with. Jung is just like, oh boy. And I've read some stuff about him as a person. He really, he made me look normal. One of the things I read about him, and it's kind of hard to explain, is that he apparently had this recurring dream he could never finish. And in this recurring dream, he was sitting on a cloud above the ground and he kept straining. It was like he was straining for an insight or something, but he would always wake up before he would finish the dream. And one night, he finally finished the dream. And what he dreamed is that when he was straining, he ended up turning it into a bowel movement. Now, he didn't have that problem in the bed, in reality, he just dreamed it. But for some reason, this was an insight that he had that helped him with his theory, Jungian psychology, if you will, which it is known as. And I'm thinking as I'm reading this, I'm just going, I can't do this. I can't follow this guy. He's just too weird for me. But because he's important in the history of, I do bring up a little bit of it. But I think there's a couple of terms that he came up with that you'll hear sometimes in conversation, or you may run across it. And so it's worth it for that reason. He very much held on to the unconscious. He bought into that, but he did reject, as almost everybody has since, the idea that everything we do is about sex. Okay. But he came up with this idea that was taking the unconscious even further than Freud, to I guess what you would call the ultimate degree, and it's called the collective unconscious. And by collective unconscious, Jung believed that we all share an unconscious that's come about because of all of our ancestors. Originally, there was very few human beings, depending on where you come from. There were only two, or they came from Africa, or what, it depends on what you're into. And we share the unconscious that all of our ancestors had. So we share this big collective unconscious. And in this collective unconscious, we share certain what he called archetypes. These are kind of almost symbols of certain universal things, like what is good, what is evil, that we can all understand those things because we share this collective unconscious. And what makes a villain? Even if you are the villain, you can recognize that because of the collective unconscious. What makes a caregiver? What makes a rebel? And he got into a great deal of detail about these archetypes, using some strange names like anima and animus and things like that. And I don't want to get too deep into it because, again, this is something that just struck me as too far out there, really. However, having said that, I mean, even now, today in Houston, there are Jungian psychologists. There is a Jungian society. I used to work with a guy, really nice guy. I liked him. But boy, was he into Jung. It was a little tough to have discussions about psychology with him. So it's just like, if you want to talk about archetypes, I go, yeah, okay. That's whatever floats your boat there, buddy. I like you, but we'll have to agree to disagree on this one. So now, one of the things worth mentioning about Jung is how Freud rejected him. He kicked him out of that circle of his Freudian Vienna-based psychiatrist, because he did not brook apparently too much disagreement. He was rather narcissistic. When we get to the chapter on abnormal, we'll talk more about narcissism. It's a situation where narcissists don't like to be criticized. They don't like to be disagreed with, and they'll let you know. And in this case, Freud said, I don't like you anymore if you don't like my stuff, so I'm kicking you out. So Jung was the first to go. Now he left, he was independent, made his own name, wrote his own books. And again, like I say, he still has a following to this day. I'm just not one of them. We got another guy I'm going to mention. His name is Alfred Adler, another one of the original Viennese. And Alfred Adler came up with something he called individual psychology. Now, Adler, to me, and again, I'm speaking from my own opinion here, but he was the first one that said, I've got some stuff that we might be able to test and all. And there has been some stuff done. He's almost like to me, and again, I don't even have, I think, much of a consensus in my own profession, but to me, Adler was the very first social psychologist. That's going to be the last chapter we do. It's on social psychology. And that's looking at how individual people work within groups of varying sizes, anywhere from 2 to, the population of a country. So, but he came up with some ideas that really sound a lot more like common sense to me. And he was also another one that Freud rejected and kicked out of his circle. But he was another one that rejected the whole sexual energy thing, that was the whole motivation for everything. He said that we're instead motivated by goals and purposes. I remember when I first read this going to say, we're all sitting in classrooms. So I was when I first learned about this. You're sitting in it now. You're here because you have a goal, you have a purpose. So the question becomes, are you here because of your sexual drive, or are you here because of a social purpose? And I'm kind of at this point, I'm going, yeah, I think I know why I'm here, and it has a social meaning. You're going to be doing something that has value to society. We share that in our professions. There are things that we're going to bring that make it a little bit better world, even if it's in our little small doses that we're capable of. I touch one person at a time or one class at a time. It's not a big world that I touch, but I hope that there's something meaningful about that. That's just, to me, from Adler, I could identify with that. Okay. And he said that we create our own lives. Now imagine how different that was to a Freudian. We create our own lives. Freud said our lives were created by the time we were 7. You're capable, therefore, of change. You're capable of evaluating your situation and making change if you need to. You made a decision to come to college to do this. There may be a time later in your life when you say, I can't keep doing this for whatever reason, and you make a change. You're going to do that based on goals and purposes. I need more money to support my family. I need a place where I have not a boss, but I can control my own destiny. There's all sorts of reasons you can do this kind of thing. Okay. And for him, the conscious world is a much bigger factor. What you are aware of is far more important and far larger than what Freud said. Freud was about 90% unconscious, 10% conscious. And, for Adler, it was a lot more conscious. You're so much more aware of who you are than Freud would allow. You don't need an analyst to uncover all these hidden stuff. I find when I'm doing therapy, every now and then, something will come up and I'll just say, did you ever think about this? That maybe this affected this. And it might be that that's the case. Sometimes they'll deny it at first. I'll come back a week later and say, I've been thinking about that, and maybe there is something to it. But that's not 90% of what we do. That's not 90% of what we can affect. And even when we talk about the therapies that Freud does, you'll find that it's not very good. He doesn't have much effect on change. So But he said that social factors are more important than sex. And at which point Freud's going, get out of here. You don't belong in here. You're not my type. Now, something that Adler observed, which made him start becoming a doubter in the first place, was he had noticed that people who had some kind of disability, they might be missing a leg or an arm or something like that, all the things that they did to overcome, to compensate for these problems. I even think about the bird I saw this weekend. That bird learned to adapt to having a bird, part of a bird's head on the back of its head. That bird has flown all the way from Canada twice and back at least once. It has adapted somehow to it. And Adler had seen this kind of thing in human beings, and he decided that people have this urge to strive for superiority. And he came to realize that all of us have some weaknesses that may not be visible, but that are real limitations for us. Maybe they're a lack of confidence. Maybe it's a lack of ability to organize. We all have lacks of ability. And Adler came to realize that we're all trying to strive to overcome these things. Now, there's different ways of doing it. We can concentrate on what we do well and just don't worry about what we don't do well. It's like there's something about electricity. I mean, I understand how to turn on a switch. I've even put up a ceiling fan before. That's as far as it gets. I could not pull out a schematic and make sense out of it. Heads nor tails. I've had people try and teach me. I don't get it. That is definitely not an ability that I have. And it would be silly for me to try and make a living as an electrician. So obviously I went in a different direction entirely. So it's a matter of recognizing what your strengths are, and that can be a way you can strive for superiority, or you can try something else. You could try to figure out as best you could how to become really good at something you don't really understand. In my case, and again, I want you to think of your own examples, but in my case, this would be, I'm going to learn about electricity. I'm going to cram on it. I'm going to beat myself to death with it until I figure it out and understand it. So that's another way that you could do it. I chose not to take that direction. I chose to follow my heart instead of whatever part of my head would have driven me towards that. So what you're trying to do when you strive for superiority is to master the environment. I mean, and each of you is trying to do that, and so am I. You're trying to master the environment by going to school and getting the skills and the knowledge and the competency to be able to go out there and do what you want to do, which is to work with animals, right? And you do this by going to school, by going to class, by taking tests, by learning skills, by showing up. There's all sorts of different ways that you can master the environment. And each of you will determine what it takes to do that kind of thing. Now, problems arise when you start running into situations that block you. We get impediments. Sometimes they're internal. If I was trying to teach electricity in this class, your big problem would be that I don't know anything about it. But probably not a good example there. But if you're trying to learn something that maybe you don't have a talent for, maybe you're trying to learn to play an instrument, but you don't really have a good musical ability. Those things can get in your way. Sometimes there's external things. You might, in addition to school, you might have a job and a family and a child and 2 dogs, in which case you're going to be running into all sorts of obstacles, time-wise, time management-wise, the demands that you're going to have, the unexpected things, especially if you have children. Expect the unexpected every single day. Our animals become fairly predictable, and then sometimes, oh man, they got sick or something happened, got bit by a snake. The unexpected does happen, but not as much as with children, and even with a partner. We run into things with our partners. It's going, why are you in a bad mood today? What did I do? What do I have to react to today? Or maybe you're in a bad mood and you don't even know why. You wake up. I have a theory sometimes that sometimes when we wake up in a bad mood, we just had a dream that put us there, even if we don't remember it. We wake up with that feeling still, and we start to kind of go, I don't want to do anything today. So you kind of start, you create your own environment to overcome that way. Not your fault in that case, but it happens. So all the ways that we try to master the environment, not all of them will be good, but they are the attempts on, in Adler's case, that's how you strive for superiority. Now, I don't mean that you're going to be superior to everybody in your profession. You're going to strive to be as good as you can so that you can be as competent as possible and be good enough to do what you do. You know, and you're not, even within your profession, you're not going to find that everything that is possible for you to do is something you can do. You know, and again, in my case, and again, I want you to think of your own examples, but I'm not going to work with children. I tried it a little bit when I first got in this profession. I found out real quick, it really takes another kind of training, and I didn't want to start over on something like play therapy and all of that. And for a while, I did do adolescents, but I came to a certain point where I got tired of dealing with the parents, because I'm not saying the kids weren't a problem, but the parents were making it worse in a lot of cases, and they didn't want to hear that. And I finally got to a point where the last time I tried to point out to a parent, you know, you're not listening to a thing this kid says. You're asking him a question, he's answering it, but you don't listen to what he's answering. You're already working up your next attack. And they looked at me, and they didn't want me back after that. And I said, you know what, time to cut bait. And I've been working with adults ever since. Oh, she didn't put up Fridays, huh? Okay, I'll do that. You know, I think there's been a couple of them I've sent in, and I don't know that they actually got sent the first time. There was one, I think, from the Monday or something like that. The next day I'm going, why is this still sitting here? And I sent it again, and then I heard that sound where it left. So I'm not sure there's breakdowns in that system. Sorry about that. Okay. What we got for time here? Well, for a second, I thought it said 8:35. All right. So one of the things that we do to strive for superiority is what we call compensation. This is another way of saying some of the stuff I've just said. This is where you develop areas of strength to compensate for weaknesses. Now, in my case, again, I didn't have to develop a competency for electricity beyond changing bulbs. I can change out light switches and plugs. And again, I've even put up ceiling fans. But I really just didn't have to develop much beyond that. That's just the practical stuff day to day. I'm sure most of y'all could do most of that. Some of you can do a lot more than that, I'm sure. But that's, you know, I developed strengths in other areas. You know, I didn't try to do any of that stuff for a living. What I did was to try and work with my best strengths for making a living. And that's what I believe I've done. So that's, again, what you're going to be looking at. What areas of strength? Where are you going to be best at working with animals? Some of y'all will be good in surgery. You'll be using a lot of that intellectualization, but you know, we need people that can do that. Others are going to be more content to be in a day practice. You have more, you know, just time to spend with animals that aren't nearly as badly hurt for the most part. Maybe you have, some of you are going to have better people skills than others. That's just a way that people are. We all know people that don't seem to have good social skills, maybe really good with the animals. And so those are the people, though, that have the better social skills might be the ones that do more of the person-to-person interaction that is necessary in any practice. You got to talk to folks, you know. Bedside manner can be a very important thing, you know. And I got to admit, in my profession, there's so many bad psychiatrists, and a big part of it is their bedside manner sucks. And if there's any profession where you need bedside manner, it's in psychiatry. You know, you're dealing with people that are hurting. And if, you know, you don't have some kind of compassion in you, some kind of empathy in you, I don't care how well you know your medicines and prescribe those, you're not going to be a very good psychiatrist. And unfortunately, I've seen that over and over and over again in my profession. I can't tell you. But again, within your own profession, you will find people like that. And if you're one of those people with good people skills, you might want to consider being that person that provides the bedside manner that really is so critical in all the caregiver professions. So I think I'm going to stop right there just because that's enough to think about. Let me know if you see any two-headed birds today. I'll bring my camera over and we'll see what we can do with that. Because I got to tell you right now, I'm a star on Birds of Texas, my 15 minutes of fame. So anyway, y'all have a good one. We got through Monday, at least our part, and eventually we'll get through the whole thing, and we will see y'all tomorrow. Take care.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
Bye. Have a good one. You cut your hair. Looks good.
I did. Thank you for noticing.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.